Hello everyone, my name is Alicia Jackson, licensed professional counselor. Welcome to my channel, as today we are reviewing Look at Me, the documentary that looks at the life of the infamous musical artist XXXTentacion. And man, oh man, this documentary, I was floored. I was floored by his life. I was floored by his impact. I was also floored by the things I just saw, as a therapist and using my clinical eye and to understanding him and his difficult past and his difficult life and how he navigated it and really tried to find his way. So before we get started, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, comment, let me know what you saw. Let me know what you saw. If you have not seen this documentary, I don't really recommend you watch this because I'm going to be telling all the things that I saw in the documentary. So spoilers, for sure. If you are interested, it is streaming on Hulu currently, but it's a great, and I think someone also has it up on YouTube as well. So man, it's an awesome story. It really shows where we have some growing to do, but I really want to see him, Jase, as a human being, as he is. So this documentary starts off by showing X at the age of 19, which was the year right before his death. But then it goes back to do a full chronological scope of his full life, but really, of course, concentrating on the years leading up to his death and his fame in the music industry. I definitely feel like the purpose of this documentary was for his mother to have his story be told and to really help show him as she saw him. And I definitely was able to see him through the lens of a mother, as she talked about calling him a Tweety Bird because he was so small and yellow as a baby, and how he was, even at a young age, like very wise and very intuitive. And you could see from his relationship with his mother that, because she was young herself, I believe she was 17, that she was kind of being raised and raising him at the same time. You saw their relationship more of a friendship. It was a scene where they were FaceTiming, and she said he came right out of, this was when he was released from jail, and he tried to FaceTime his mom, and she said, "Oh no, I look a mess." And he said, "Now get on FaceTime," and she did, and she looked beautiful as she always does, and he said, "You looking sexy." Normally, I'm not saying that children don't do that, but there's a very familiar relationship, and you can tell that the lines maybe got blurred between parent and friend with them just because of their age difference being so small. So my knowledge of Jase or X before this documentary was very, very little, as I'm a little up there, but I did see how his music impact had a huge impact in the younger demographic, right? And so I did hear of his passing and was just very sad by it. I think it just felt very reminiscent, him and Juice WRLD's death, even though there was not the same beef that was happening in my era, which was between Biggie and Tupac. It still felt very reminiscent of two artists who were taken in their career very early, but also made this huge impact, and there was such this huge love. It was just huge love for both of them. They had such a huge following, and both of them were, really surrounding their feelings and their mental health. And so that's kind of what really made me gravitate to understanding both of these gentlemen. I did one on Juice WRLD as well, on his documentary, but really made me curious and really wanted to know more about this man. First, I am not a cinematography expert or anything. I do have preferences, right? When it comes to telling of a story, I do like multiple lenses and real intimate lenses of people. So meaning when I say multiple lenses, there was in this documentary, you really got to see and fully take in all of who X was, because you had his lens of his mother, his aunt, his managers, his friends who were really close with him and met him in juvie, his group, members only. You had his girlfriends. You had a great lens of him from different perspectives. And then you also, because they were, they had this footage of him as well, you were able to also take in your own image. You were also able to take in like your own perception of who he was as a person. And then also, of course, and I'm biased as a therapist, but to also hear from his therapist as well, and just how they interacted with each other was beautiful to, again, take in all that he is. And I really appreciated that. I really also too liked the lens of the producers and musicians that he worked with, and talked about how he was able to switch through genres and just effortlessly. And it was, again, beautiful to see all these different aspects of him. So what I would like to focus on for the most of this documentary review is really what I saw clinically kind of happening in his story, and also where I saw like the things that motivated him, and the things he used to protect him from pain, and also the things that he used to drive and motivate himself to be a better person, despite all the many challenges that he did face in life. And so Cleo, his mother, talks about how X was named Jase, which is God said, which was explained by his father. And again, mom was 17 years old when she had Jase, and his father was arrested when he was 10 years old. His mom said he was very, very spoiled, and monetarily though, but from Jase's perspective, X's perspective, he felt very, very alone and isolated because his mother was constantly working and providing for him. And he said it and it was so interesting how he said it in his words. He said, my mom was just focused on the money, and that was all she cared about. And I think he was coming from a place of anger from like that little boy in him who was alone and needed companionship and nurturing. As he said, he felt like emotionally neglected as a child, because his mother was a single parent, and felt really alone. He just didn't feel seen. He didn't feel heard. And his mother said that at the age of 10 was when he started to really wild out, is what they said. And could you imagine? He had a very, very close relationship with his father, and his father went to prison and was in prison for 10 years. So he never saw his father again, because that X unfortunately passed at 20 years old. And he was getting in a lot of trouble in school. And he was diagnosed with bipolar at the age of 13. That's a very young age for a diagnosis of bipolar. So I understand mom's leeriness in our culture, specifically Black culture, but she was also Jamaican as well. So that adds more layers to the conversation of mental health. But mental health, especially at that time, is not much of a conversation as it is now, and there is a huge stigma. There's a huge stigma in regards to medicating Black boys for their mental health. And also there is this thought that is prevalent that boys, specifically Black boys, are targeted more when it comes to diagnosing them and putting them on medication. There's a thought that is out there. I'm not saying that thought is true or that thought is untrue. I'm just saying that thought is out there, and that's what can sometimes lead parents to be very leery of seeking help. I will give Cleo a lot of grace by saying she still had him in therapy. And so I think that was really the kind of the moving force for him, to be open to therapy as an adult later on in life, as we saw later on in the documentary. But she did, introduce him to a therapist. Sometimes the teenagers in therapy, it can be a little dicey, just because a parent is saying, hey, here's my child, they need to work on X, Y, and Z. The child may not feel like they need to work on X, Y, and Z. And so they just, they sit there oftentimes and have a very hard exterior that makes it sometimes challenging for the therapeutic relationship to develop for the work to happen. And so I'm really curious about how far that therapist was able to get with X, but we do see that he struggled a lot in the area of school. And it's very challenging for a child with mental illness without any accommodations or structure or anything to be able to navigate what is the American classroom, right? There's not a lot of bend in American classroom. You have to learn a certain way and behave a certain way in order to move through it. There's not much accommodations, and the accommodations that they do have are still kind of limited. They don't really meet the needs of the child. Just in my humble opinion, as I'm a parent of children with special needs and have to advocate for them as well, it is a bit challenging. They say, here's the will, and they need to roll, they need to roll with the punches instead of trying to maybe even create a new will for a child to be able to be successful in the classroom. And I know it's limited. Teachers are doing the best they can. It's not the teacher's fault. I feel like it is a bigger systemic issue. It's just to give a lens as to what he was facing as he was getting kicked out of these schools, these multiple schools. And oftentimes what happens with children who have special needs or maybe neurodivergent, that they often feel and they get the message from adults in their life that they are bad. They're a bad kid, because they keep getting punished instead of getting the support and help that they need. And so his mom said he was kicked out of every single school in the district and had to move in with his grandmother. And that was at the age of 14. So think about that. From the age of 10 to 14, he was kicked out of every school in the district. My goodness. Think about the emotional turmoil that would do for a child children, for the most part, want to do well in school. That's their heart. So I really could see how he would just really struggle. And then his grandmother's house was closer to the hood, as mom called it, bad neighborhood, and he really clung to that behavior. He found his group, he found his belonging, because everywhere else he was shunned, right? He was kicked out. He found a community to take him in, and then he wanted to be a rapper, and he wrote his first song at 14, and his family were like, this. His mom said that it's not very positive, but it sounds really good. So she encouraged it, and I give her kudos for that too, because I think sometimes parents want to push their child sometimes in a way that's like representative of them. Like, oh, I don't want my child to be rapping this lewd language. And at the same time, he was using his creativity and expression to kind of really manage what he was feeling and dealing with on the inside. So we see that he is getting into a lot of criminal activity. The family has kind of called him the bad child from the lens of his friend Ski Mask, that he met in juvenile detention, and they really bonded over music and the fact that they were shunned from people. Like, that is what they bonded off of. And they were also, working, hustling, potentially stealing things and making money. And so because he had this kind of shaming feeling from his family, that he moved out on the street. He moved out on the street and chose to live on the street because he was being shamed from his family. So I want to talk a little bit about the physical violence that we saw prevalent in Jase's life. He talked about being a child that was 6 or 7 and biting and fighting off men who were being physically aggressive towards his mother. As we saw in the documentary, his mother was very, very reluctant to own up to the fact that she was abused. She said that his biological father, attempted to hurt her a few times, but she kicked him out. But she also then stated that, we were discouraged for turning in or pressing charges against men because we were supposed to protect them. And that is very much a part of the culture. And you could see it. You could see it in Jase's behavior, and you saw it as a way that he kind of built attention from himself. and protection for himself, right? So he's all alone. He has to protect himself, and he's protecting himself in a way that is maladaptive, right? Physical violence. And at the same time, this is what he's using because this is what he's seen and this is what's worked for him. I fight off my mother's boyfriends. I'm going to fight off whoever I need to fight off. And his friend talked about how he said, you know how you have, you know, a little part of yourself that tells you don't do it. He said, Jase doesn't have that. And it speaks to what typically does happen for individuals who are diagnosed with bipolar, that tend to be impulsive. And that's a part of that's a part of their experience, right? They have this lack of inhibition at times. So it shows definitely in X's behavior when he was videotaping himself in all of these fights. And there's of course more famous fights, but they weren't shown in the documentary. But you get to see the lens of how violence was introduced into his life, And also they talked about his parents to use corporal punishment to discipline him as well. So physical violence was something that was introduced into his life. And we see that it also played in his personal life and his relationships, because he was allegedly accused of physical violence. His girlfriend at the time, who was allegedly being physically abused, she escaped and asked and sought help. And she tried to get help from her ex-boyfriend's mother. And she said, well, you gotta leave here. And she went to the police department. And there was another young lady who had visited the home that Jase was living in at that time, and also heard from outside of the room his girlfriend being physically abused as well. And this goes to the very complex space of X's life. And it's so interesting to kind of sit here because he was in a state of panic, right? Because he knew all of the court cases that he had out and around because of the criminal activity that he participated in. And he was coming from a space too where he's building this following and wanting people to see him in a certain light, and so protecting himself. And I'll tell you the reason why that was so important for X, because you could see how he really cherished and valued his connection with his followers. He was messaging his followers personally and always communicating with them and trying to be seen, right? He talked about not being seen as a child, and he was really trying to utilize that as a way to be seen. So not having that, finally getting that, right? And then not having that because of the situation, and also potentially losing his music career and all of this because of that. That was a huge risk for him. And so he did some things that were not okay. He was trying to coerce her for, to not press charges. And of course that was caught on tape. It was highlighted, but they didn't really highlight it a lot. But the deposition that helped to get Geneva, X's ex-girlfriend, who he allegedly physically abused, showed that he was also physically abusive towards himself. He was punching walls and also participating in self-harm as well. And so you can see that there's this internal struggle within himself, right? You can see there's this internal struggle where he wants to be the bad guy, right? Because it's like, okay, you think I'm bad, so I will become bad, and you'll still love me, right? And at the same time, there's a part of him that hates this villain, this portrayal that how people see him and how he sees himself, and he just wants to be seen as little Ja. Like, he just wants to be seen as that 6 or 7 year old boy who wants to be nurtured, wants to be connected with. We also see where he was struggling with living and being alive. His mother talked about him being obsessed with death at a very young age, and him being very matter of fact that he knew that he was not going to live past 21. And I think about because that's so reminiscent, right? Even Biggie Smalls, I remember him saying, I'm not gonna live that far. And I feel like what we don't understand and we don't give space to a lot, we're doing much better. We are, but having a space where Black men can be able to say, I'm depressed. His therapist, Guy Willer, who I feel just was a beautiful display of how having a therapist that looks like you can really benefit you. Because he said, I could see this hard exterior, right? He said, I could see this hard exterior, and I know that was built for his survival. And so for me to try to take that down and dismantle that from him to get to him, that wasn't going to work for him. That I just had to see him as a human being and connect with him that way. And that was tapping into his younger self that was really, really wanting to be seen. And he respected that. And he was able to do some really great and brilliant work with Jase. And so that was really powerful and beautiful to see. Of course, the most unfortunate fact is that he wasn't able to continue to live out the work that he was doing within himself. That's what's most heartbreaking. Also see, right, he's having this internal struggle with being alive. Like, okay, death. Is death so bad? Because this doesn't feel good. That's oftentimes what happens when individuals are truly suffering with depression. That they are, is death bad? I mean, this life that I have isn't really great, right? So maybe death isn't so bad, and really partially like trying to passively even do things where like this maladaptive risky behavior starts to happen, that you see where like participating in criminal activity can really be seen, and in our world we see it as delinquents, but I from my therapist lens see it as like, hey, I don't really care about whether I live or die, so I'm just gonna do whatever. And it doesn't matter. And so you saw to him like jumping from the second level of a performance venue down to the crowd, like, I'm gonna commit suicide, which he said, and it was, you could see these risky behaviors like he would just participate in because there was just a part of him that wasn't well, like wasn't wanting to continue to live because of the life that he had. I'm just grateful that he was able to get hospital care at the time that he needed it, and able to connect with a therapist that was able to see him for who he really was, and not just his behavior, like not just the headlines, right, but just to see him as a human being, because that's really what he needed. So we touched on this a little bit earlier, but I want to touch on it and kind of sit with it for a moment, because I really feel like his fans played such a huge motivating role in his life, as they were a way that he got connection. He was able to understand, right, and he was able to communicate from his vulnerable space, whether it was like through the rock music he made, or the rap, or even like the mellow R&B music that he was making. He was able to connect his true feelings, and they received it, right? So they received who he really was, right? And he met them there. He met them, and he communicated to them and with them often. So that was like the beauty of the connection. I think the shadow part of the connection was where he was using it as well to kind of build this image that we were talking about before, that supervillain image, and betray this negative character, right? Because he was being painted as the bad guy when it came to the domestic violence allegations and also his criminal activity, that he was using this as like this hard exterior to be indestructible, right? That you can't get me, you control me, you can say whatever you want to say about me, but I'm still going to be me, and I'm still going to keep doing me, right? And so once he was able to have his moment, even with whether it was the label that he was working with or even his mother. He was able to hear them. I really feel like that was Josh's saving grace. A lot of times it's hard when you don't have a space or relationship with someone where you can actually hear what they're saying, to know that what they're saying is something that is coming from a place that means you good. It's not coming from a place where they're looking out for themselves or what they feel that you need to be doing, but it's coming from a place of like true, genuine love. And so he was able to take that in and say, well, I am doing some things that are not okay, and I need to switch this. I need to switch it. So there was a switch, and there was that famous video where he attended his own funeral, and he fought himself literally, and you could see through his career how he fought himself literally, and was able to come to this place where he was trying to motivate his following to do better, to take care of themselves, to journal, to give to organizations, to do a lot of great work. And so I could truly understand for his fans how they truly mourned and grieved, because they really had a connection. Like, this was not a faux connection of just an artist posting on Instagram or social media and not having interaction. No, he genuinely interacted with them on a constant basis, and it was because of the lack of connection and because of that part of him that felt alone and rejected and wanting to be that for other people and also feed that need for himself. Josh even talked about it. He talked about it. He said there's a difference between X and Josh. He said Josh is, people viewed him as weak or meek, and nobody gave up about him, right? Nobody cared how he felt. But X they care about. One of the things that one of the members from his group, Members Only, talked about is that the things that he did to get respect, because unfortunately in our world, darkness sells, is what he stated. The things that he did to get respect were not okay, right? Were not okay. And so that's sometimes the two-edged sword that comes with fame, that oftentimes what is done to be glorified can really harm you. And we saw that with his life ending. I think some of the lessons that we can learn from X's life is to truly, and this conversation is being had, but I think it just needs to happen more often, is to nurture Black boys. I think that's so important, and how incarceration directly impacts a child. His therapist said this is a traumatized individual who hasn't been given the space to grieve. He was grieving his father. But what was happening was behavior, right? Was behavior. That's all people saw, was the behavior, and they didn't see his hurt. We need to nurture Black boys. We need to do better to nurture them. We need to do better with attending to their mental health. And we need to see people as people. When allegations are made of physical violence or traumatic circumstances or events, I know that we as a society do have the need to respond, and how we respond as humans is directly impacted or directly correlated to whatever's happening within us. Hear that. And at the same time, when it comes to attacking people because of what they have alleged happened to them, I think that's something we need to pause and think about as a society. We really need to pause and think about. I'm not saying that every time someone makes allegations about somebody that it's true, but I am saying that if someone's making allegations about somebody, if you weren't there speaking on it, I don't know if that's our place. Because I feel sometimes that does more damage than good. And I know that's very tricky to navigate in our culture, where we are having a lot of conversations online like this one, right? And at the same time, how do we have the conversation and still maintain the humanity of a person? How do we have the conversation and still maintain the humanity of a person? Because X is a person, or X is a human being, Geneva, a human being. How do we do this? Because human beings do things that are not okay. And at the same time, does that mean that because they do things that are not okay, does that mean that they are less than human? It's just questions to ponder. Also, what I feel like we could learn from X's life is giving children, specifically black boys, because X was black, to give themselves a space to express themselves creatively, to explore their emotions, to really understand themselves in a safe space. Giving them that opportunity can be so valuable to their life. I feel like if X was able to maybe get a better understanding of who he was earlier on, he might be still here. There may have been some things that he wouldn't have had to go through or put other people through because of his internal struggles he was dealing with. Also, I think too, what we need to continue to have conversations about, and we do have a lot of conversations about mental health. I'm sure some people are tired of it. And at the same time, maybe there's some things that we need to improve on with our conversations about mental health. I recently did a video talking about what's missing from suicide prevention, because Black suicide is increasing at a large rate, and we need to truly attend to our mental health. Stigma is killing us. And we saw where stigma prevented X's mom from getting him the full help that he potentially needed. And it's a challenge. And I know some people are okay with psychotropic medication. Some people are not. Some people trust doctors. Some people don't. I understand the cultural factors that are at play. And I understand that. What I will tell you is to address it. Do what you feel is best with getting the information and talking to people that look like you and understand all of those cultural factors. So you're in a space where you feel safe, right? You're in a space where you feel safe. That's what's most important. So I would encourage you, if you are a person of color or a Black person, to really seek out mental health professionals. And I know it's such a challenge, but I will have in the description places to find practitioners of color, therapy for Black girls, cliniciansofcolor.org. Those are just to name some off the top of my head, but places where you can find practitioners of color to create a safe space for you to explore. Parents, if an outside source is telling you that your child may have a potential diagnosis, I would encourage you. I know that the immediate response can tend to be like to dismiss it, but I would encourage you to just explore and get testing, because if it's there, then the testing will show that. If it's not there, then the testing won't show it. And you'll have knowledge, and they'll give recommendations, and you'll have more of a clear understanding of what's happening with your child, so they can get the support that they need, versus just saying, no, you don't know what you're talking about, and not going any further. Lastly, but of course, definitely one of the biggest lessons I feel we can learn from X's life is in the area of violence. Unfortunately, we live in a violent society, and it is becoming more normalized, which is so eerie to think about. But violence in our homes, that's something for you to personally sit with. I'm not gonna be on a soapbox and preach one way or another. As a therapist, I know that I don't have I'm well enough to know that I don't have any place or even realm of control to say or recommend what someone else does in their home. And at the same time, I want you to get curious about and even explore potential areas of discipline that may be out of the scope of corporal punishment, as a way to decrease the amount of violence that is normalized. in our homes, in our society. As we see that X being introduced to violence in the home, lived a violent life for most of his years. And I'm just curious, if that didn't happen, would that change anything for him? Would that change anything for him? So I would just ask you to be curious about it. I would really ask you to be curious about it. I know that this is a very hot topic, especially in Black homes. I know it's a very hot topic. And if you're activated by any of these topics, I would just, again, as I always do, ask you to be curious. Like, why is it? What is it about this that's making me become defensive? What do I fear will happen if I don't corporally punish my child? Oftentimes what parents fear is our children being in situations where they're in police custody, or where they're arrested, or that they're also going to be in situations where they might be physically harmed by a potential classmate, because there's not a lot of security and safety even in schools. So children are often fighting. So we teach. You even saw that the men talked about it in Members Only. They talked about it for themselves, saying that their cousins beat them up so that they'll be able to learn how to fight. And so, like, violence is introduced to boys specifically, and just to get curious about, is that how we want to protect ourselves? And I know I already can hear, like, well, if we're living in a violent world, don't we have to be able and ready to protect ourselves? So I know this is a very layered conversation, but it's just something I want you to maybe get curious about and try to figure out for yourself if there are any changes that need to be made. Let me know what you think. I know that XXXTentacion is a polarizing character just himself, because of the things that he has done or was allegedly accused of, and also because of the life he's lived and how he died. I'm grateful to his mother to tell his story, and I'm grateful that she shared her son with us in this way. It's a very intimate lens, and I have been better, and I've been made better by learning about this man and learning his story. So tell me in the comments, tell me what you learned, what you saw, what stood out for you, what touched you throughout this documentary. What lessons did you learn from X? How did he help you as an artist or through watching this documentary? And then what do you feel you can do differently because of those lessons? What do you feel you can do differently in your life because of those lessons? Of course, like the video and subscribe to the channel. And as always, be cool, be calm, be centered. Peace.